Hello everyone, this is RC0538. I'm bringing you another unit guide. This time we're looking at the supply section of units. Now, in case you're new to Wargame or haven't played the game before, supply sections or your supply units, just like in the real world, are used to keep your units fighting, running, and being repaired so they can fight the war. I believe Napoleon said an army fights on its stomach. If your army doesn't have food, then it won't be able to march. Or an army marches on its stomach, I believe, is closer to the actual quotation. But so, anyways, while your army doesn't need food, infantry doesn't need food. But what the tanks need fuel, everybody needs ammunition, and everybody needs to get repaired at some point or another if they've taken any damage. That's the role of your supply section, or your supply units. This is a section that you just cannot overlook. If you do, you're essentially dooming yourself to failure because, you know, while it may seem totally fine to go without, command units in favor of more offensive units, it's going to mean that your tanks are not going to be able to be in the fight if, they've already lost a significant amount of health. You're either going to have to send them all the way back to your forward operating base, assuming you brought one, or they're just going to be there in a state of disrepair and an easy kill for the enemy. So, basically, the logistics section will always ensure the survivability of your units. Now, let's look at the ultimate supply unit, the forward operating base. This is a supply building, if you will. It's the only building that can be deployed in Wargame, and it stays in one of your spawn zones, and it sits there. And it sits there, and it sits there until something comes along and takes supply from it. Now, usually these are used for your support units, like your artillery, for example. They'll usually do what I call FOB circles, or forward operating base circles, where they just kind of go in a loop around your forward operating base. I wouldn't recommend this necessarily. You can move them. I think you can be more creative with that, where you move them. But, you can just kind of dance them around the FOB, and they'll get supplies when they need them. So that's kind of one of their roles. The other major role that they have is as a hub for your supply units to refuel and take supplies from. Otherwise, your supply units, after you buy them, are kind of useless because, if you run out of supplies in your supply units, they've got to go back to, go somewhere to get those supplies. And you can go to your neighbor, aka your ally, to get some supplies, but sometimes they won't be too happy about that, especially if you're using, like, MLRS artillery, and you're firing that near my forward operating base. I'm going to be like, no, and I will close my FOB. Now, that might seem rude or unnecessary, but I feel like that just ends up wasting supplies that I will need later. If I'm run out of half my FOB in the middle of a long battle, and I have units that are constantly getting worn down and need to get repaired, if I need to hold a position, then I can't have my forward operating base in a state of, being low on supplies. Because some units can be extremely taxing, like your ATGM units, or repairs can also cost a lot of supplies. All that sort of stuff is extremely expensive, but artillery being the worst offender, I'd say, because it uses a lot of ordnance, especially if you're using it a lot. So that's the forward operating base. Bit of a rant there on it, but let's move on. Next, we have our more expensive supply helicopters. Now, you might wonder why you'd bring, say, a Super Stallion or CH-53 when you could bring a forward operating base. They're both very big and both have bad optics, but you could say, well, the Super Stallion moves, but it has significantly less supply. So people might overlook these supply helicopters, like I did early on, because it just doesn't make much sense to have it, at least when you're beginning off. When you're beginning. So, why do you have supply helicopters, is the obvious question. Well, I'm going to answer that. The role of the, supply helicopters is as a middleman between your forward operating base and your supply trucks. You're going to have these guys flying constantly back and forth between your forward operating base and your kind of middle to kind of front line. I say kind of front line because you aren't going to be putting these guys on the front where the troops are. If you have a lot of units that need repaired, you might withdraw some of those forces gradually back to the line, back behind the line to this to get repaired, but I wouldn't recommend to that because this is a 75-point helicopter and you only get 3 of them. So if I'm the enemy or if you're me, I will find my mortars or a cheap bomber and I will suicide it to kill this unit because, yeah, this can be pretty valuable, and denying that to the enemy is extremely useful. Just for, it makes logical sense. You knock out a third of his logistics capability, first off, and secondly, you're denying those units the chance to get resupplied. So I'd keep this maybe in your mid to kind of front line, and then you can use HEMTTs to bring it directly to those units, or nearby those units, so where you can kind of take them off the line, but still keep them relatively close to the battlefield. Like any flying unit, any helicopter, I should say, the Super Stallions and such cannot be hidden in cover. This makes them easy to spot, and if you see them kind of going down, it's easy to guess and predict where they're going to touch down. Meanwhile, a supply truck, you can weave it all around in the forest, and you can keep it there, and it will be hard for the enemy to kind of guess where you have it, unless you have a bunch of units sitting out in the open, kind of in a circle, which would make sense. So that's going to be, of course, leads us to the role of supply truck. Supply truck's main role is to bring it, the supplies to your troops, into your tanks, and your forces, when they're in a town or when they're on the front line. That's the biggest role of HEMTTs, or any supply truck for that matter. That's how I'd recommend using them. HEMTTs, I'd even say, are a bit big to bring into a town just because they have a lot of supplies, which means bigger explosion should I be able to shoot that and explode it, and cause it to explode. Now, the HEMTT, of course, is well aware of that, and in order to keep it from being totally vulnerable to everything they do, it does have some armor on it, and it's extremely quick, so it can survive some of that, but that doesn't mean that it's going to survive all of it. So that's kind of your supply section in a nutshell. If you want to see how to structure this, you can check out some of my deck guides and how I've structured them. But anyways, hope you've enjoyed the video. If you found it useful, please like it, and also if you think there's someone else who you might find use for this, please share it out. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to my channel for more Wargamer Dragon and other strategy gaming and other gaming content. Anyways, this is RC0538 signing off. Have a good day.